Great. It's lovely to be here, particularly because I used to live just a few miles down the road or up the road from here in Chiswick, where my husband and I were for 13 years, where 4 out of our 5 children were born. So we've been in West Yorkshire since then for the last 14 years. So it's a rare treat to come south and to see familiar. I came out of the station this morning and went, oh my goodness, I remember this, but that shop's changed. So kind of time has passed. Things are the same and not the same as we discover through life. So this morning, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do 2 talks, and I thought it was a bit of a cheat if I just rehashed the book, because obviously then you won't buy it, which is... So what I've done is actually take themes which are related to the book, and I'm going to be speaking a bit on Colossians, which is the dominant portion of Scripture that I focus on in the book. But I'm doing things slightly differently. So you're not hearing Pause, the book, you're hearing related themes and ideas to Pause. So do go and have a look at the book on the bookstall. So thanks, Sherry, for praying for us. Shall we get stuck in? So you've got a heading in your booklet, which is for this first talk. Has got one word actually wrong, which is probably my error. So the first talk is Hope in the Unchanging God. And there's quite a significant irony to the fact that word is the word that's wrong. Because my first point that I want to talk about here is actually about how much this world changes. And to think, what do we need to cope with the menopause? How do we manage in midlife with all the many, many strains and difficulties that we experience? Well, we find hope in the unchanging God. That's the first way we can do that. And we begin by accepting that life is change. So accept that life is change. That truth that life is changed feels so much more real, I think, to women than to men, because our lives are marked by such clear seasons and just repeated monthly change for a large part of our lives. Our bodies work on a clock that we just have no control over, apart from some particular forms of medication. Perhaps you can remember when puberty hit you, the arrival of your first period. For some girls, those changes might be welcomed and celebrated. They're now part of the club of grown-up women. But for others, and it was for me, it was horrible. It was terrifying. My body was changing. I had no control. This thing called a period came, and it hurt, and it was horrible, and it was dirty. It didn't make me feel sophisticated and grown up. It made me feel really alienated from my body. It is scary. Sometimes we just don't want to grow up. And then as you get used to periods, you have that cycle of emotional ups and downs, as well as the physical discomfort. For some people, really extreme discomfort when there are disorders with their periods. There's this monthly seasonality, this time changing that occurs in our very bodies that we cannot escape as women. We can't be unaware of. And although modern life with kind of hygiene and products and medication can minimize some of the problems there, we are still locked into bodies that are changing, that remind us day by day, week by week, that life is change. And then we get to the menopause, possibly via having babies, conception and pregnancy and breastfeeding and all those other aspects of change to our body, which can disrupt us and sometimes bring deep joy and sometimes agony and difficulty. So the menopause comes and we experience the changes of midlife. Our changing bodies, hot flushes, aches and pains, emotional ups and downs, loss in bone density, all these different physical features and emotional experiences of change are often accompanied by the changes of midlife, of just middle age, when our parents are starting to age and needing more help. We might have our own health concerns, might have questions about work. We might think, well, just where am I going in life? What am I doing? what do you want me to do, Lord, at this stage in life? We've been on a treadmill for so long, and menopause and midlife hits us, and things are often thrown up into the air, raising all kinds of questions which disrupt us. My son sent me a link to an essay by a poet I'd not come across before called Mary Ruffley, I think. She's American. She wrote an essay called Pause, which is why he sent me it. And it was an essay which she starts off by, it was actually a photo of her journal, which she kept during the menopause, which she'd just done a tally of how many times she cried. Not how many times she cried each week or each month, but how many times she cried each day. Now, that might be an extreme, but it was really interesting to record and to read that record of her experiences. And what she said is worth repeating. She said, "You're a 13-year-old with the experience in daily life of a 45-year-old. In other words, you go crazy." Of course, that's not everybody's experience at all, but certainly some of us, just from the laughter then, kind of resonates with us, doesn't it? So life is change. Life is disruptive change. It's all part of human experience. So why not just suck it up and get on with it? Women have been going through this since the fall, haven't they? So why not just get on with it? I think there are several answers to why, particularly in this era now, we find that difficult, as well as just the reality experience. First of all, is that actually, as we've just seen from that truth there, from Mary Ruffley's own experience, it just is jolly hard. Particularly in midlife, we've got used to things, maybe. We've got used to our bodies, we've got used to our families, and then change comes. And it's just not a new discovery. If you look at texts from the classical world, philosophers like Aristotle and others are writing about women's bodies and how changeable women they are. And they go, what is this all about? Avoid women at this time. But secondly, we've got used to living in a world in which we are in control. The modern age has brought us medication. We have women, we have education, we have all kinds of things that enable us to live lives that are relatively smooth and streamlined. Birth control particularly means that we feel like we've got some kind of control over our bodies and their patterns. So when menopause hits us, we suddenly have to accept that we are not in control. And that some of the women who have been writing the books that are in Waterstones and selling so well are women who have particularly been in control of their lives, their careers. They're celebrities, they're wealthy, they're powerful, they've got influence. So it's no wonder that for some of those women, the steam train that is menopause hits them, and they're suddenly thinking, what is going on? What's this all about? But I think the third and final thing is why menopause can feel so disruptive is that it just shows us that women are different from men. Classical philosophers, I just referred to Aristotle, but he, amongst others, thought that women were less than men. They were like second-class men that just hadn't quite got enough goodness and wisdom in them. And the way that women's bodies linked them to these cycles of change made those philosophers class women as being associated with the earth, with the body, with the flesh. It's a kind of second layer of existence, whereas men are associated with the spirit and the mind. They can do the thinking, they can do the serious work of society, managing society. So when we get our hormones disruptors and disturbers, when our bodies change significantly, we are faced again with this reality that we are different, that our bodies influence our daily experience of life in a way that is different from the way that men's bodies influence their experience of life. In the feminist movement in the second wave in the 60s, there was a tag phrase which is biology is not destiny. And maybe you've heard that today. It's often used in the abortion movement. Biology is not destiny. It's the feminists of that era fought against the fact that our bodies could dictate or should dictate how we live. For women in the past, they've been classed as second-class citizens because of their bodies, and you're going to have this kind of life because of your body. Feminists are going, no, your body is not your destiny. That shouldn't determine how you are. So it's particularly disturbing and discombobulating for us if we're kind of living in this world that says your body should not hold you back. Find ways to manage it, to control it, when your body suddenly starts doing things again that you can't control easily. So this is a truth, a simple truth. We women live bodily seasons. Time ticks in our bodies, and it can feel as though time and change and our bodies tie us down sometimes or tie us up. But it's not an injustice. It's not the result of the patriarchy that we have, menopause and periods. And it's not something that necessarily needs fixing. Of course, there are great things, and Rosslyn's going to help us think through some of the things that can help us manage the changes in our bodies. But life is change, and coping and flourishing within the menopause and midlife has to start with accepting this truth that life is change. Wonderfully, the Bible does offer us rest, doesn't it? We know that. It offers us faith and hope and rest, because in a world and in bodies that are just going through constant change, it speaks of the God who is unchanging and a God who cares about the changing world that he has made. So we're going to dip now into Ecclesiastes 3, and I'll read it out for you. Just start with verses 1 to 8. So it's printed out in your booklet if you've not got a Bible. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. Striking poetry. And maybe it's really familiar to you. It's a section that actually is often read at funerals, isn't it? Because it seems to offer a message of acceptance. Life has all kinds of stuff in it, all kinds of experience of extremes that all fit into life's rich tapestry. No wonder secular people, if they're going to pick one Bible passage for their funeral, they'll pick this one because it seems to be godless and just talk about variety and offer perhaps what seems like a platitude, a truism. There's just stuff that happens. Just all things pass. Every cloud has a silver lining. Life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about dancing in the rain. Those kind of platitudes. But the good news is that that's not really what the passage is saying, is it? It's far more profound and far more helpful than those platitudes. Because there's complexity here. In these pairs, these what seem like opposites, actually, are they opposites? We don't know. Is it better to be at war or to be at peace? In some instances, it's better to be at war. We've just had D-Day. That was better to be at war, surely, than to be at peace and make peace with oppressive regimes. Sometimes it seems it might be better to scatter than to gather, but how do we know? Which one is better? Some of those situations are bleak, some of them are just confusing, but the passage tells us that life will contain them all. It tells us that life is varied, it is full of change, nothing lasts, not the bad times, not the good times, and sometimes we can't tell which is which. But it tells us life is full of change, and we have to accept it. The Bible allows us to have this unflinching realism about life. It doesn't sugarcoat the fact that we are frail, that life is full of change, and that there's plenty of difficulty in it. Throughout Scripture, we have repeated images of grass, of flowers, of dust, and of breath. They're all images of things that just don't last, things that are frail and broken. The idea of the broken pot, something that is every day, is just here, there, and gone. Fleeting human life. We aren't the superhuman, all-conquering beings the media will have us believe. It's not just about tweaking our diet or doing just one thing to get our health right. We don't even have solid personalities, do we? There's not an inner you that remains the same and with the right kind of therapy can self-actualize into great flourishing. We're creatures of change in a changing world, and sometimes we don't even know who we are. Finding rest in midlife starts with accepting our weakness, our frailty, accepting we're creatures of change. But there's good news as well. My second point is we need to believe that God orders change. So if you look at the beginning of that passage that I've just read, there's one little phrase that hints at something greater. It says that there is a season for every activity under heaven. While in Ecclesiastes, the phrase under the sun is used repeatedly to denote our worldly existence, occasionally this phrase under heaven pops up and it points to a greater reality, the presence and the purpose of God. This poem brings our worldly lives, our just everyday lives of change, and brings them under the vision and the rule of God. Our lives are under heaven. Now, there's something more. This is something more than would suit a secular funeral. This changeable life is under the rule and the sight of God. Nothing is hidden from him. Nothing is excluded from his rule. Nothing is excluded from his appointing. And that we need to recognize that while change is painful, there's no point denying that God orders it all for his purposes. So if we carry on and read the next 6 verses of Ecclesiastes, let's see what we find there. Again, it's printed in your booklet. What do workers gain from their toil? I've seen the burden God has laid on the human race. He's made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the human heart, yet no one can fathom what God has done from beginning to end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. This is the gift of God. I know that everything God does will endure forever. Nothing can be added to it and nothing taken from it. God does it so that people will fear him. Whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, and God will call the past to account. So this is like the other piece of bread of the sandwich, isn't it? We had the first piece of bread, there's a season for every activity under heaven. Then we have all this time, and then we have this other bit of the sandwich, which points to God's purposes. He is the maker of all this variety we see. He is the ruler of all the times. They are within his time, but not the sum total of existence. So it's helpful to remember here and notice that the writer of Ecclesiastes talks about a burden. And that's great, isn't it? To just think, it's all acknowledged. Life is a burden. The trials of midlife are part of a burden that is related to the fall and to our mortality. And that's what we don't like. Even in a secular funeral, people don't like acknowledging our very mortality. Every aspect of our lives is marked by hard work and decay, the toil that the writer keeps repeating. The consequence of disobedience for Adam and Eve, and for the rest of us then, is labour through childbearing and our whole fertility, and in physical work. And one of the key components of this toil and burden is loss. If we look back through that list of time, we'll see it's like a dark thread that runs through the passage. We've lost the ease of work. We've lost our closeness to God. We've lost, there is death and war and scattering and decay. It's no wonder then that when we get to midlife, we're experiencing significant loss. The loss of estrogen in our bodies, the loss of our looks maybe in one sense as we get lined and get liver spots. It's not only that as well, that the troubled feelings and experiences of loss that rise can generate a really deep kind of grief. In the Guardian newspaper the other day, I saw a link to a study by scientists from University College London. They'd surveyed 9,000 women to monitor their rates of depression. And they came up with the conclusion that perimenopausal women have 40% higher risk of depression than women at other stages of life, 40% higher. And it kind of parallels the rates of depression in teenage girls. Go back to what the poet said. You are a 13-year-old with the life of a 45-year-old. It's no wonder, though, that this kind of a depression comes not just from the hormonal activity that's going on in our lives, but from these repeated losses that we're experiencing, the loss of fertility, the loss of friends in real bereavement, the loss of children moving from home, the loss of maybe the thought of a life partnership, the loss of looks, the loss of certainty in our careers. All kinds of losses hit us at this stage. So it's no wonder that people have what used to be called a midlife crisis. Having to realise our mortality and the brevity of life in this way can lead to real breakdown. And I think even more, this passage hints at why this grief and loss is so deeply painful, because we have eternity in our hearts. God has placed it there. The eternal God has placed eternity in our hearts. We have an eternal spirit, and so we long for significance. We long for what lasts. And we live in a world where nothing really lasts, or little lasts. Made in the image of God, though disfigured by the fall, we have this yearning for God and the yearning for the rest and peace of eternity. So, as you feel buffeted by changes and swamped by this sense of loss, knowing that God has made you for change, he's put you in this world of change, but that he remains the same, brings enormous comfort. We can rest in the reality of his certain purposes, overarching rule, knowing that the change in our lives is actually for good. A very ancient saint with a delightful name of Jeremiah Burroughs, he wrote a book called The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment. I recommend it highly. Says this: a Christian comes to contentment not so much by way of addition, but by way of subtraction. It is not the removing of the affliction that is upon us, as the changing of the affliction, so it is quite changed into something else. He's, as it were, imagining a kind of old-fashioned balance sheet in your kind of book where you tot up your gains and your losses. And he's saying that it's not by regular maths of adding up that you gain contentment, but actually it's by subtraction, as God subtracts things from you, and actually as you subtract from your desires for worldly things that are not going to bring you contentment. Those things, when we experience subtraction and loss, actually that can be the route to great contentment. So it's brilliant when your hot flushes end, or if HRT can really help you with brain fog, or that your volatile moods are changed by exercise. But what is even better is that through these trials and changes, whether or not we find techniques and strategies that help us, is that our hearts are changed, softened towards God and towards others, growing in self-control, made more gentle, made more grateful. And that's the thing that my lovely colleagues don't have. For them, there's no reason to change. Change is to be resisted or to be embraced in a kind of mystical way. But it doesn't lead to anything eternal. But for Christians, when we accept that we live in a world of change and then believe that God orders and controls this change for good, and we notice this pattern of division and loss bringing a harvest, which we can find right from the beginning of Scripture, dividing and creating, dividing and flourishing. We see that as a new crop can emerge, seeds have to die so that new life is brought about. So this is a direction we're going in. We're going towards eternity. And that direction is towards a judgment, the ultimate proof of meaning in our lives. If there is no judgment, then what's to say what's a good life? What's to say that people are precious, that things are right and wrong, there's justice or injustice, other than our human working out and our rather arbitrary measures? Because, as this passage says, the judgment is coming, that God will judge everything. We see that in verse 15, that God will call the past to account. We have meaning and we have significance. Our acts, our words, our deeds, our feelings, all will be judged. And so all are significant and purposeful. In our sense of loss and bereavement, we still know that we have significance. So it's good news that judgment is coming. It's good news that there is this loss in our life because God is doing something great out of it. It means that our lives are significant and that God is not fickle or arbitrary, but he's working, using change for great purpose. And so that means that we can find rest. My final point, we can find rest as we fear the unchanging God. So in verse 14, we see that of this passage here, we see that God and his acts don't change. He's the one who sets eternity on our hearts. He is eternal. He is the one creator. He manages time and change because he's beyond change and time. If you notice those mysterious words in verse 15, which talks about whatever is has already been, and what will be has been before, talking about God's eternal time being beyond and above this world and the time that he has made. If we return elsewhere, we see maybe easier ways of understanding that. God is the eternal rock, the creator, the strong tower, the eternal Father. They all make the same point, that God is beyond us, powerful, unchangeable, eternal. He who rules over all will not change. He endures forever. And that is what can really help us to come to terms with our changing bodies, the decay that actually use the word change, but actually, and I was talking to a friend a while ago about this and said something about change. He said, "You just mean decay." It is decay, isn't it? If everything in existence was changing, then where would we be? We could do what we want. We would have nothing to trust in, nothing to hope in, but knowing that God holds the universe in his hands. He is always the same. He does not change. He is beyond time and change and chance. Means that our changing lives have meaning. They have an origin and an end. They have a purpose. And Ecclesiastes tells us that the reason for this, the reason for all these times and the eternity of hearts is that we should fear God. That's a bit unexpected, isn't it? Because I just don't think we think about fearing God much, and particularly in midlife. Maybe it's slipped from your mind. Our lives are so full, aren't they, at this stage of life? Some of us may have children. Most of us have aging parents. We've got homes to look after, pensions to worry about, work responsibilities, all the physical stuff that's going on in our bodies. We can feel more than ever before in our lives embedded in the material, physical world, more than ever kind of locked up. And even somebody said to me the other day, just really trapped by this stage of life, trapped by all the kinds of demands that are put upon us. And we may feel trapped in that and resentful. We may just be so preoccupied that we can't think beyond it. Or we might actually end up being preoccupied by ourselves. Just like the teenager, the angst which strikes us in midlife can just be crying out, but what about me? What about me? When do I get a break? When do I get a rest? Can I change? Can I just step out of this for a moment and get a break? We're uncertain about the future. We remember the griefs of the past. Sometimes we lament thinking about the limitations of everything that's ahead of us. Sometimes, just like my dear friends, Joanna and Sharon, we're just fixed on the here and now and trying to gain a little bit of comfort because it just all feels overwhelming. And we want a God who comforts us. We want a bit of a hot bath God or a hot chocolate God who will just make this difficult stuff a little bit better, sweeten it up, give us a bit of a rest. A God who doesn't demand too much from us. And possibly we want to ditch the idea of judgment because that's a bit scary and it's a bit embarrassing to talk to people about that. We maybe want to give up the idea of taking up your cross and self-denial and sacrifice because it feels like just life is full of that anyway. We're grown up and we want to look back and we think back to when we were young believers, maybe if we've been believers for many years, and think, maybe we're just all a bit naive then, a bit over-eager, a bit over-enthusiastic. I know better now. Or maybe you're a new Christian or you're just exploring Christianity and what you're looking for is something that just will make life a little bit easier, something just to help you keep going. But I'm afraid that's not the kind of rest we're talking about. That's not what the Bible offers here. We're to fear God, as Ecclesiastes tells us. The God that we learn about, the God who's eternal and beyond this world, who is all-powerful and governing it, is a God maybe feels a little bit more like a cold bucket of water thrown over us. It's so shocking and so disconcerting. Awe, fear, trembling, those are the ways that we should approach God. Doesn't look like a message of rest or peace, does it? The truth of God's eternal control can just feel a bit dispiriting. So maybe you want to say to me, just hold your horses. That's the kind of Old Testament. You've forgotten about the New Testament. You've forgotten about the soft bit, the nice bit, the friendly bit. Well, maybe not. Let's look at our New Testament passage, which is in the booklet now, briefly. So this is from Colossians chapter 1. And it tells us, the Son is the image of the invisible God. So he's not any different, is he? He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. So we're just going to look briefly at this in a few verses. And I hope as I read that, you thought, oh no, fear of God isn't just an Old Testament idea. Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who preached in London in the 19th century, talked about a gracious fear that drives Christians to God, not away from him. And I think that sums up this passage. We should have a gracious fear as we learn about Christ who is God, Christ who is over all things and for whom all things are made. The dimensions of this should just leave us astonished, amazed, trembling. This God is so great, so awesome in his power. A Puritan writer talked about fear of God as well. So Watson, writing in the 17th century, said the fear of God promotes spiritual joy. The fear of God promotes spiritual joy. If we fear God properly, it should lead to an upwelling of joy as we look at who he is. He goes on, it is the morning star. They do like their really quaint images. The fear of God is the morning star that ushers in the sunlight of comfort. If we look for a small God and look for the hot chocolate God who just tells us nice, easy things of peace, 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 we don't get the sunlight of comfort, the full brightness. But if we look at God, who God really is, he's his utter control and power and authority and rule, then the sunlight comes. Because in knowing God's control, his changelessness, his authority, the fact that he will judge and so things in this world have meaning and significance, then we can bask in sunlight. And it gets even better. Because did you notice here at this end of the passage, Jesus, the eternal one, takes on flesh. He makes peace through his blood. He takes on a body with blood in it. He takes on a body that will go to die, go to the cross. He's the ruler of all things, with no obligation upon him, no necessity upon him, forcing him to act in any way other than his own character of love, which took him to the cross. We'll think more about the cross and what that entails for our midlife experience in our next session. But I would just want to leave you with this idea now of the awesome power and the incredible condescension, the way that God bent down in love and came down, taking on flesh, taking on a human body to help us, to come and die for us, to bring us into relationship with him. There's so many things that will help us in midlife and menopause. There's loads of practical wisdom and sensible advice to listen to. But what we need most of all is this fundamental truth of a loving God, a God who loves us so much that he takes on flesh, who is utterly in control. The existential fear that we have, or that non-Christians have, when they go, what's it all about? I've laboured this half, I'm halfway through my life, where's it all going? Which can give rise to incredible distress and anxiety. When we look at the person of Christ, when we look at who he is and what he came to do, we can rest, we can find significant peace. So what I want to ask you to do is to fear God, to be in awe and amazement at who he is, redirecting your eyes and your hearts to his eternal, unchanging reality, the unchanging God who took on changeable, mutable flesh. Explore the heights and the depths of this truth as we go for the rest of this morning and as you go away from here. Find your rest in the unchanging God and fear him. I was inspired to write this book because a few years ago, menopause hit me. When that was first happening, there were a lot of books being published by celebrities. There were experts writing books about the menopause too, and there was discussion in Parliament. Everybody seemed to be interested in the menopause. But Christians weren't talking about it. So it started me wondering, well, what does the Bible say about the changes that women's bodies go through? How should we understand them? And is there any help that the gospel offers us? I hope that readers will put the book down after finishing it, excited about the opportunities that Jesus gives us in midlife and menopause, opportunities to serve and to change and to know him better.